Chapter 3. Sage. Sage tucked a hand into Bennett's elbow and let him usher her into the restaurant. He looked nice in an obviously new shirt with dark jeans and black boots. He smelled yummy, so manly. She didn't blame Ray for being worried. Hell, Sage was worried. A relatively young widow, unlike her friends whose marriages had ended in some form or another, she wasn't eager to jump out into the dating pool. A year or so after Gordon died, her sister had begun to nudge her about trying to date, but Sage couldn't even imagine it. She hadn't even taken off her rings. Ray was even less a fan of the idea. "You don't even know this man," she had protested when Sage called to tell her about the plans that evening. "You know his name, and that he works for Breville, and that's it." "I know he used to live in Charlotte. He's got 2 kids about your age. He's a widower. His wife's name was Valerie? No, Virginia. Oh!" Sage snapped her fingers in the air. "Alexander Repair. That's what he said his business name was. He just does work for Breville. He's not an employee." "Well, I'm going to check him out," she said. "What? How?" "Online. We have his name and his business name, his wife's name. I'll do a background check. Something's got to be out there on him." Sage had been rifling through the closet for something cute to wear. She didn't exactly want to advertise all of the goods, but she did want to show off a little of the merchandise. She settled on a sweater dress she'd never worn and a pair of boots, then moved through the small apartment while she waited for the hot water pipe to kick in and the bathroom to heat up for her shower. "It's just dinner, Ray. I'm meeting him there. Don't get yourself worked up about it. He's not looking me up on the internet." "How do you know?" "Maybe he knows everything about you, and he was just waiting for a chance to come into the shop and decided to start working for Breville. Did he kill Ned to take his job, then bust into Roosters and break my espresso machine so I'd have to call to place a service call?" Sage chuckled. "You watch too much Criminal Minds. Those writing courses have your imagination working overtime. Are you all packed for tonight?" Over the years, the Owens holiday traditions had been modified to suit their smaller family, but they still got together on Christmas Eve and spent the evening watching movies, eating popcorn, and being thankful to still have each other. The next morning, there were presents to open and Christmas dinner to get on the table, carols on the stereo, and the Macy's parade on the TV, creating a cacophony of festive sound in the background. Bennett and Sage were seated in a booth at the rear of the restaurant. The place was dotted with patrons, not busy but not empty either. The hostess rattled off the specials for the evening and stepped away, leaving them to stare at their menus and nervously eye each other. Bennett cleared his throat and set down his menu. "I guess we aren't the only people who thought going out on Christmas Eve was a good idea." His eyes bounced around the room, then landed on hers. She noted, just casually, that his eyes were the exact shade of a full glass of rich, dark liquor. Sage shrugged a shoulder, laying down her menu next to his. "I already know what I'm having. Citrus marinated pork rib roast and their fingerling potatoes with pancetta. I had it last year and I have been dreaming about it for the past 300 and some days. Oh, that sounds good. Virginia could cook up a good roast. It's been a long time since—" He froze then, his eyes growing wide and his mouth dropping open. I I'm sorry. I'm rusty at this." Sage laughed, waving off his apology. "It's fine, Bennett. I know you're not supposed to talk about the previous—" He sighed, exhaling a loud breath that seemed like it came from the center of his chest. "I was almost ready to back out tonight. Maybe this was a mistake. I don't even know what words to say." Sage reached across the table and laid a hand atop his, giving him a tap to get his attention, to bring his thoughts outside of himself. "You're doing fine. It's all right to talk about Virginia. You'll probably hear some things about Gordon tonight, and I'm not sorry. Don't you be sorry either." A palpable sense of relief crossed his face. He dropped his shoulders down from around his ears. "Thanks. I think I need to stop reading articles about how to date." Sage laughed. "Probably. It's tough, isn't it? Especially the second time around. Do this, say that, don't do this or that." He blew out a breath, shaking his head, then reached for the glass of water the waitress had set in front of him. Sage ordered her roast and potatoes, and he ordered the creamy chicken marsala. They decided to split a bottle of wine since it was a special occasion. The waitress bounced away to place the orders and bring the wine. So, Bennett toyed with the white napkin folded neatly next to his silverware. How many dates have you been on since Gordon died? I could count them on one hand, she said, halfway frowning. It's not fun, especially since the men I meet don't seem to be half the man Gordon was. Uh, Present company accepted. Bennett smiled, almost laughing. I was worried for a second, but I agree. I lost a good thing, and I'm not gunning to replace her, but I do want companionship, and that's been hard to find. They don't make them like Virginia anymore. He smiled, bringing his eyes to hers. Present company accepted. It took a few minutes, but by the time the salad bowls came and went and then dinner plates hit the table, they were chatting like old friends. Rebecca is good with numbers, Bennett was saying. She got her undergrad degree in finance, and she's finishing up her master's soon. She's gunning to be the youngest VP ever promoted. She's a commercial account manager right now, though. Sage hummed appreciatively, chewing a mouthful of succulent pork roast before commenting. Sounds like she has a good head on her shoulders. Maybe she should open her own bank. Wouldn't hurt to have another black bank owner. True, he agreed, nodding. His plate was nearly clean since he'd sopped up the vodka sauce from his chicken marsala with a hunk of crusty Italian loaf. That's definitely on the career plan. First, she wants to conquer Bank of Charlotte. Their masthead is all old white men. She wants to break that glass ceiling, and I don't blame her. Same with Ray. She's in a writing program, writing for television and stage, I think it's called. Eventually, she'd like to direct. She's creative, I'll give her that. I hope it translated to work that pays bills, you know? In my day, that was stuff you did in your free time. You went to school for something that paid real money. Oh, I wouldn't worry too much. Look at all these black women writers and directors out there. Oprah, Ava DuVernay, Regina King. What's her name from the Cosby Show? Oh, Cousin Pam. I know who you mean. I can't remember her name, but she's always Cousin Pam to me. Yep, and Issa Rae. Hell, even Viola Davis is writing and directing, not to mention the ones we never hear about, the up and coming writers. There'll be plenty of space for her when she's ready, and like Rebecca, she might want to break down some walls herself. I guess that's a good way to think about it. So, what about your son? Bennett sighed, pushing his plate away. He balanced his elbows on the edge of the table and clasped his hands under his chin. The crease in his forehead deepened, and his eyebrows drew together. Albert is. The boy is smart, but he's like Teflon. Nothing sticks. He's on his third major with no graduation date in sight. He's okay with numbers, but thought he might be more artistic. So he was an art major, but he didn't want to take art history classes. Then he discovered that he likes cooking, so he applied to the Charlotte Culinary Institute. They asked him to wait a year and reapply. Well, he lost interest in that, so he shrugged his shoulders dramatically. Instead of paying for him to flop around another year, I suggested he take some time off and decide what he wants to do with his life. Bennett reached for his goblet and tipped a swallow of lush red wine into his mouth. That was 2 years ago. I'm not pushing, though. He's working at the home improvement store. He's working at the home improvement store, and he seems to like it there. He held his hands up in surrender pose. All I want is for him to be happy, to pay his own rent and car insurance. He's managing that. Sage couldn't keep her laughter at bay any longer, but tried to at least cover her mouth with her hand as she giggled loudly. Youth is wasted on the young, I heard once. I guess that's all you can ask for, though. Weren't you nervous about leaving him back in Charlotte? Nah, he answered, sipping more wine, then swishing it around in his glass. He's a kid of many talents. He's intelligent, always lands on his feet. I think he's afraid of getting stuck somewhere. He wants to love what he does. I don't know, maybe he looks at me and thinks he doesn't want to be that guy, fixing things for a living. It's nothing prestigious, but it kept us in good living. But you like what you do, right? He shrugged. Not always. I fell into the repair business when I got laid off of a job. I had a natural curiosity about how things work, and as a boy, I used to be the one to get things going around the house. It was just my mother and me and my younger sister. I bet he remembers the lean years of Alexander Repair and Virginia working overtime at her sales job to make ends meet. It cut into our family time. We all had to make sacrifices. Now that I understand, Sage mused, commiserating. There were a lot of years that Ray wasn't wearing name brand clothes and shoes while we built Gordon's business. We made it, though, and he left us well taken care of. What did he do? Oh, he was like your daughter, into numbers. He was a financial planner, CPA, business manager, all of that. He worked for a firm for a long time, but decided to strike out on his own. I still wanted a little freedom to help out, but still do my own thing, so I worked at my sister's cafe. So that's how you know so much about running a coffee shop. Yeah. When Ray got accepted at Healy, she talked me into doing what I said I always wanted to do. Looks like things are going well in that department. What about other departments? Sage knew what he was asking, but was so amused she couldn't resist playing with him. Are you being fresh with me, Mr. Alexander? The corner of his mouth tipped up when he laughed. That made her laugh too. Too soon? Actually, not at all. It's been 6 long years, you know. About that from me too. I miss it. Especially this time of year. Gordon loved most holidays, but Halloween and Christmas he went all out. Bennett swirled the wine in his glass and sipped. Yeah, Christmas was Virginia's favorite too, mostly because, Sage sat through the pause that followed, giving him the time he seemed to need. He set the glass down heavily and swallowed what must have been an enormous lump, and when his eyes rose to hers, they were glassy. Sorry, he mumbled, his voice low and gravelly. Anyway, you said Gordon was into Christmas? Yeah. And then you said Virginia loved it too, because when he didn't respond, she reached across the table and curled her fingers around his. Bennett, it's okay. I get it. Talking helps. Go ahead. He heaved a loud sigh, one that must have emptied his chest of air. Then he sucked a breath in and said, Today is her birthday. Oh, she whispered. I am so sorry. What a difficult day for you, and I'm over here rambling. No, you're good. We usually set aside today as a family to celebrate her, not lump her in with Christmas. He nodded, licking his lips. Yeah, she liked that. And then she made a huge deal out of Christmas, the food and the trees and the lights and the perfect gifts. I couldn't replicate that. It became a burden to try, but I miss it. Sage's eyes slipped closed, and she nodded, humming in commiseration. My daughter wanted to hold on to all our old traditions. I do it for her, mostly, but it's not the same. She paused, giving the moment its time to pass, and then softly added, I'm sorry you're without her now, especially on her birthday. Thanks, he answered quickly, gulping the last of his wine. He pushed the goblet away and reached for the still full glass of water, swallowing half of it in a few seconds. Think I'd better start hydrating. I'm a lightweight lately. So, let's change the subject. What do you like to do for yourself? Away from the shop? Sage brightened. Oh, I used to have all kinds of hobbies back in Ocala. I haven't picked any of them back up. I like a good stitching, bitch. And I used to be a pretty good bowler. Okay, Bennett sat up, beaming across the table. I haven't picked up a ball in a while, but I'm a passable bowler. Oh, yeah? We should. Well, if you want to bowl sometime, Lake Lane's just renovated. I hear it's real nice in there. It's next to the Kit Kat. You ever been out there? Once or twice. I hear it was a rough place back in the day, but since the new mayor took over, it's mellowed out some. Bowling sounds like fun, though. You have your own ball and everything? Sage frowned, reaching for the last of the bottle of wine. What real bowler doesn't have their own ball? Bennett. The evening was mild, the air cool with the breeze off of the lake, but not cold as they strolled from the front door of Zuko to Sage's car, a late model Toyota. She groaned, cradling her midsection. I'm so full. I don't know how I'm supposed to eat the junk Ray and I plan to eat tonight. Pace yourself, Bennett replied, a hint of amusement writing his tone. He shoved his hands into his pockets, though he wanted to drop an arm around Sage's shoulders. She seemed comfortable with him, though, threading her arm through his as they walked across the empty parking lot. They'd shut the place down, occupying the corner of the restaurant, so long that the manager had to gently lure them outside with a gift certificate for $20 off their next visit. Both were surprised that the hour was so late. Time had flown by so fast once they started talking about hobbies, bowling, hers, and fishing, his. They'd each promised to treat the other to their favorite activity in the coming weeks. Sage had wisely parked near a street lamp. They neared her car and then stood beside the driver's side door. The glow around her lit her up like the aura of an angel. Well, Bennett began, his hands still in his pockets. Well, Sage answered, smiling up at him and breathing a light sigh. This was fun. I agree. Anytime I can eat myself silly is a good time. Then you'll have a lot of good times around Potter Lake. I, uh, I was so surprised when you came back to the shop. I guess I figured, I don't know. I didn't think you were interested. I'm surprised I came back too. Not for the reason you're surprised, though. I was interested the moment I saw you. Even more when I learned you were a widow. There's a special understanding between us. There is, Sage agreed. Maybe that's what I've been doing all wrong, looking for everything else when I needed to be looking for a connection with someone. A spark. So, thanks for being the spark. Well, you're welcome. I've never been called a spark before. Sassy, spirited, smart mouthed, yes. Spark is a new one. I like that I could give you something new. Bennett moved in, a few steps closer. They were so close he could feel the heat and smell the perfume wafting from her skin. There's something else I'd like to give you, if that's okay with you. Oh, it's fine. Sage never finished the word because Bennett's mouth pressed against hers so hard her lips smashed against her teeth. She whimpered ever so slightly. Bennett ended the kiss abruptly and stepped back. I'm. Wow, that was. He couldn't help but laugh. That was so 13-year-old boy's first kiss. I know what I'm doing. I promise. It's okay, Sage soothed. I'm rusty too. Relax. Come here. She opened her arms and reached for him. He stumbled forward, feeling silly and slightly tipsy. Pull your hands from your pockets, first of all. Now slide them around my waist. There you go. Sage stepped in, closer and closer still, her arms resting on his broad shoulders. You remember how this goes, she whispered, tipping her face up to his. In the moonlight and the bright glow of the street lamp, she was just about the most beautiful woman he had laid eyes on in some time. His arms tightened around her, pulling her in even closer, molding her body against his. Bennett dipped his head to meet her, and this time the kiss was light, airy, soft. Sage moaned and opened her mouth, her tongue flicking out to tease the seam of his lips. By instinct, his opened. Their tongues met, and he couldn't stop the groan that rolled up from the pit of his belly. His hands began to roam, his palms exploring a few inches above her waist. When his hands dipped below her waist and cupped the generous roundness there, Sage sucked in a breath and pulled back from the kiss, pulling her arms from around his neck. With rapid pants of ragged breath, her eyes darted around the parking lot for a few seconds. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. No, Sage barked, holding up a hand. Don't apologize. I was having a good time. It's just that She gestured toward the Zuko marquee, still lit by what seemed like a million fluorescent bulbs. If I didn't have my kid waiting at home for me. Bennett grinned, oddly proud of himself. He'd taken a few steps that had him shaken in his boots before. Then I hope this won't be the last time we see each other. You're supposed to let me win a game or two of bowling. And you're supposed to teach me to fish. Right. And I'd very much like to see where kisses like that end up. Me too, Sage answered, her palm over her chest and her voice a little breathy. I have to go. Ray is probably about ready to call the FBI. but I definitely look forward to seeing you again. For sure. Is the shop open after Christmas? Sage smiled. Bright and early, 6 a.m. Bennett nodded, then turned to head toward his truck. See you then, Sage. Good night. Good night, Bennett. Chapter 4. Bennett. Got a little pep in your step, brother? Monroe waved from his perch, a glass of something amber in one hand, a cigar in the other. Bennett had parked the pickup in front of the house and walked up the sidewalk toward his half of the duplex. He hadn't noticed the lift, but then again he was distracted by thoughts of that kiss with Sage. Bennett detoured from the planned path to his front door and climbed the few steps to Monroe's porch. The screen door was propped wide open, so he stepped in and sank into a weathered but surprisingly comfortable leather chair covered by a faded afghan. Without asking, Monroe pulled the glass from a cubby next to a small, dorm-sized refrigerator. A collection of liquor bottles sat atop it, some full, some nearly empty. Monroe picked one out, twisted off the cap, and poured a few splashes into the bottom of the glass and slid it over. Bennett took the glass, as well as the cigar offered. After clipping the end and lighting up, basking in the smoky, woodsy aroma, he downed a sip of whiskey. Monroe leaned back, glass in hand again. Went down to the barber shop for a quick cut. Heard you were taking Miss Sage out on a date. Y'all have a good time? Surprised, Bennett's brows shot up toward his hairline. Man, news travels fast around these parts. Yeah, you learn that pretty quickly. Hard to keep yourself to yourself. Well, how was it? It was nice. She wanted to go to Zuko, that Italian spot. Oh, yeah. Nice place if you like red sauce and such. Miss Sage doing all right? Bennett nodded, puffing more of the cigar, sipping more whiskey. She's good. We talked about, her husband, her daughter, the shop. Nothing too deep. Suppose you two have a lot to talk about, what with being in the same situation. My Gladys been gone about 15 years now. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I ain't. Monroe wheezed with a long laugh. She ain't dead, just gone. Run off with one of my so-called friends after the mill shut down and jobs dried out. Old ungrateful. Bennett tried not to laugh, but couldn't help it. You're something else, Monroe. He cackled, his mouth wide open and showing all of his teeth. Heard that a time or two. Hell, if I was 20 years younger, I would have asked Miss Sage out myself, but she don't want an old man. Now, a young buck like you, though, I saw it when I first laid eyes on you. Saw what, sir? Just you. The way you are. I knew you wouldn't be chasing after some of the young ones that have been moving out here. You'd want someone mature. You know what I'm saying? Live some life. Got a good head on her shoulders. Thought to myself, he'd make a great match for that coffee shop lady. Monroe stopped to sip more from his glass and take a few puffs from his cigar. Real nice night, he commented, gazing out over the yard and the homes across the street. So you had a good time, you say? You'll be seeing her again. Yes, sir, said Bennett, sighing into his glass. He knocked back the last of the whiskey and stamped the cigar out. I better head on home. My kids and my mother will be calling early to make sure I'm all right. Well, go on ahead then. If you get lonesome, I'll be here. There's a big Christmas dinner at Helen's Kitchen at 5 o'clock. I'm heading over there around 4 to help set up tables. Could use a few extra hands. Bennett nodded. He'd been trying so hard to make it through Christmas Eve that he hadn't even thought about plans for Christmas Day. Doing some work, keeping busy, and having some of Helen's famous cooking. Couldn't pass that up. Yeah, sounds good. I'll see you tomorrow then. After a handshake and a nod to Monroe, a walk down the steps and across the sidewalk to his own steps, Bennett unlocked his door and stepped inside the house. It was dark, save the single lamp in the living room. That was a Virginia thing. She hated coming home to a dark house. He'd taken on the habit, even now that she was gone. He turned off the lamp, then headed to his bedroom at the back of the house, unbuttoning and discarding clothes and shoes as he went. His mind naturally drifted to thoughts of Sage. Sage in that dress. Sage up against him. Sage's perfume, the softness of her lips, The sound of her laughter, the way a smirk made her lips purse and twist to one side. Sage, not in that dress. Bennett groaned, first sitting, then laying back across the bed. He stared at the ceiling fan, as he had done every morning and every evening since moving to Potter Lake. But tonight, his thoughts weren't on his wife, his love, his peace. He rolled to his side, trying to tamp down the feelings of guilt that racked him, because no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Sage. Sage. Ray, I didn't die. He didn't turn out to be an usurp or whatever you call it. Unsub, she screeched, pacing the tiny, tiny space that was Sage's kitchen. Unknown subject. Girl, if you don't settle down with these dramatics. Sage frowned, her eyebrows drawn close together. She reached for the silver ladle and a thick mug. This cocoa is ready. Grab those mini marshmallows. Why won't you tell me about your date? Because you take everything too far and out of context. I'm not giving you ammunition to look him up. He's fine. She poured 2 ladles of creamy milk chocolate into a mug and handed it to Ray, then picked up the second mug. I mean, really fine if you must know. Mom, Ray gave her the blankest, most unemotional stare. I do not need to hear the lustful moanings of a 47-year-old, especially when she's my mother. I thought you wanted to hear about my date. I do. I do not, however, want to discuss his fineness when it's related to my mother. You're no fun. Come on. She picked up both mugs, which Ray had topped with mini marshmallows, and headed to the living room a few steps away. What are we watching first? Home Alone? We're not watching anything until you put on the PJs I brought for you. Ray plopped down on the couch and stretched her legs out to prop her feet, clad in festive Christmas socks, on the coffee table. The rest of her was covered in a pair of all-in-one pajamas, also festive for the season. Hers was an image of a decorated Christmas tree, flashing bulbs and all. I'm not putting that thing on, Sage grumbled. Sitting around here, looking like Frosty the Snowman in a white snowman onesie. No. Mama, Ray whined. You promised go put it on. You can change when you go to bed. I don't. Ma! Do it! Ray barked, pointing toward the bedroom. Sage stared stubbornly at the TV, then huffed and cut her eyes at her daughter, then punched her fist into the couch to help her stand and stomped toward her bedroom. I don't know when you got to be so bossy, but I don't like it. I've been bossy my whole life, Ray sang from the living room. Sage didn't want to put the thing on, but had to admit the longer she stared at the screen print image of a happy snowman all laid out on the bed, the cuter it seemed. Well, just for a few hours, I guess. As she peeled off the t-shirt and leggings, her eye caught the pile of clothing she'd worn on her date. The boots stood in the middle of the room and the dress was puddled around it since she'd changed as soon as she walked in the door. She smiled to herself, thinking about Bennett. Those eyes, man, those eyes. And those shoulders made him easy to hold on to. That chest was so nice to be up against, and his lips. After the first kiss, of course. Sage chuckled to herself, stepping into the fleece garment, then pulling it up around her waist, then pushing her arms into it. He must have been so nervous, poor guy. But she had been able to get him to relax. And that second kiss, ooh, baby. Her skin flushed and a wave of heat radiated through her at the memory. She was most certainly ready for more of that. Stop stalling, Ray shouted. Let's go, we've got movies to watch. We're only watching 2 movies, little girl, Sage snapped. The last button closed and stepped out of the bedroom. You're not keeping me up until dawn. Not my fault you was out kissing boys at all hours of the night. Excuse me. She settled on the couch, tucking her legs up under her. She cradled the mug of chocolate in her lap. Mr. Bennett Alexander is a man, thank you so much. Ray shot up a hand, turning her face away. Okay, that's enough. I don't need to know any more about his manness. See, you start stuff and don't want to finish. Sage giggled, then reached for the remote. Let's do Home Alone first. Hand me that popcorn, girl. They'd spent the evening laughing at silly 7-year-old Kevin McAllister foiling a home robbery, eating an entire bowl of popcorn, and finishing off the cocoa. Sage stretched and yawned, dragging the nails of one hand through her short, messy bob. I know I said 2 movies tonight, but I feel like I got beat by the sleepy stick. It was a long day. How about we fire up the second one after breakfast? Her gesture must have been contagious because Ray opened her mouth and roared a satisfying yawn herself. Yeah, I'm tired too. Tomorrow it is. Are we still doing Helen's Kitchen for dinner? Last year was bomb. The first few years in Potter Lake, Sage had tried to cook and serve a full Christmas meal, but there just wasn't the room or the equipment. The previous year, Helen and her husband Orlando, owners of Helen's Kitchen, Potter Lake's finest home cooked soul food restaurant, opened up their building for a special dinner. Tickets went fast, but Sage managed to snag a couple for them. Dinner was amazing. They talked about it for days, and a new holiday tradition was born. Bomb is good, right? When Ray glared at her, she shrugged. Yeah, that's the plan. Are you going to be okay out here on the couch? You want to get in the bed with me? Ray was already unfolding blankets and fluffing pillows. She reached into the duffel she'd brought back with her and grabbed a small cloth bag. No, I do not want to share that little ass bed with you. I learned my lesson the first year. But let me brush my teeth and put my scarf on before you get in there. All right, just don't leave a mess. Not enough room for a mess, Ray grumbled, passing her on the way to the only bathroom in the apartment off of the bedroom. Sage followed her, picking up the path of clothing on the floor and on the bed as she went. So your date went well? Ray asked, muffled through a mouth of toothpaste. She poked her head around the bathroom door and thrashed the toothbrush around in her mouth. Ray Ann, I know I've told you about that. Getting toothpaste spit everywhere. Get in the bathroom and brush your teeth. Sage moved to stand in the doorway behind Ray. And yes, the date went very well. Very well. I'm going to see him again. Ray straightened. Sage watched her eyes, cognac brown like her dad's, grow big and round in the mirror. She reached for a silk scarf that she kept bunched in the small bag and unfurled it, then wrapped it around her hair, capturing her 2-strand twists in the fabric. Like seeing him when he comes into the shop? Or seeing him? A little bit in between. He's supposed to take me fishing. Or probably go bowling. I haven't touched a ball and Mom! Ray whipped around, the small bag in her hand. Her expression was incredulous. Bowling was a you and Daddy thing. Sage paused, then pushed away from the entryway and re-entered her bedroom. Ray followed, her brows knit together, making it obvious she wasn't pleased. Yes. Yes, it was. Though we didn't do so much of it the last few years. Well, Daddy got busy with the business, and you didn't want to go bowling league by yourself. So you're just going to replace Daddy and start bowling again? Ray, I am not. I mean, what else? Are you going to have him start doing that Daddy used? You know what? Don't answer that. Good night, Mom. Ray brushed past her, bumping her shoulder as she went. Ray, honey. But Ray had determined that she was done listening. She was already under the covers on the couch. She flopped to her side, presenting her back to Sage, and pulled the blanket up over her head. Good night, she whispered, reaching up under the lampshade to douse the light in the room, then tiptoed to her bedroom and pushed the door closed, then heaved a long, loud, emotion-filled sigh. All she wanted was to find a way to ease that dull ache in her chest that was ever present. Every moment of every day for the last 6 years it was there. For a few hours with Bennett, it hadn't been there. She ached for it to disappear again. Chapter 5. Sage. Sage sipped on a mug of coffee, steam still rising from the rim. In the small kitchen, Ray sullenly went through the motions of chopping onions and scallions, then mixing eggs for their traditional Christmas breakfast of crustless quiche and bacon. Sage tossed a salad and made the sweet mustard-based dressing that she knew Ray loved. Brunch was a quiet affair, full of one-word answers, mumbles, and shoulder shrugs. Ray's mood disintegrated into the afternoon. She was so glum during the viewing of the Santa Claus that Sage reached for the remote and paused the playback. Ray was on the love seat, opposite her on the couch, her feet hanging over the edge of the armrest. She was still in her holiday onesie, though the festive spirit that they were supposed to encourage was nowhere near the room. What? Ray asked. I was watching. We should talk about last night. Our conversation ended poorly. Let's try again. Ray sighed, swinging her legs down to the carpeted floor and reaching for her duffel. Nothing to talk about. I guess it's been long enough. She pulled out a tube of lip balm and popped the top, then aggressively rubbed the cherry scented wax across her lips. You're getting older. You don't want to go into your twilight years alone. Makes sense that you'd be looking for some. Ray Ann Owens. Sage's sharp tone jabbed into the atmosphere, making her daughter jump. Slowly, she lowered the tube of lip balm and recapped it. I have never raised a hand to you, but if you don't find a muzzle for that mouth right now, I might start. I have had enough. Look, Mom, I said be quiet. When Ray had closed her mouth again, albeit with a frown, Sage continued. I've put up with a lot over the last few years and listened while you expressed your opinion about everything from the shade of my lipstick to the size of the cups I use at Roosters. You've been here for me since Daddy died, holding me up, making me move out here, making sure I'm okay, and I appreciate that. Sage got up, then walked around the coffee table and sat next to Ray, dropping an arm around her shoulder. She expected Ray to stiffen, but instead her shoulders slumped and she leaned into the side hug. You're damned right, she continued softly. I'm getting older, and no, I don't want to go into my twilight years, which are quite a ways off, by the way, alone. But in no way am I trying to replace your daddy, and nobody in this town is going to be able to. Am I being understood? Yes, ma'am, Ray mumbled, her head bowed in appropriate contrition. I'm sorry. I'm just having a hard time with you wanting to do stuff you used to do with Daddy. If you're having a hard time, think about what I'm going through. This is an entirely new ball game. I'm doing the best I can to still live and enjoy my life. Nobody's picking out China patterns. It's a few dates, a good time. I need your support here, Ray. Okay, Mom, I'm here. But I don't want to hear stuff about how fine he is. Just, keep telling me that he's nice to you. That's all I need to know. You've got a deal. I'll call my sister to dish about how good he smells and those big shoulders of his and how big his. Ray rolled her eyes and groaned, Mom. That's exactly what I mean. Sage laughed, then laughed again. I was going to say hands. You are still no fun, so is it okay if I pick up bowling again and maybe take my new friend with me, even though it's something I used to do with Daddy? Ray was quiet, her head bowed so low that her chin nearly rested on her chest. After a few moments, her head lifted and she shrugged. I guess. But you better not be letting him win. Another deal. Now, there's a bunch of presents under that tree with your name on them. She nodded her head toward the small, pre-lit tree that Ray had loaded down with too many ornaments. You know we have to send pictures of you opening Grandma's gift, so we'd better get on it. Then I'll shower and get dressed. I want to get to Helen's early so we don't have to stand in a long line. Bennett. The last person he expected to see that day was Sage. He supposed it was because her daughter was in town, but he pictured her sitting cozy and warm at home with a plate full of delectable goodies in front of her TV, maybe something cheery blaring in the distance. So when he marched through the space at Helen's kitchen, gripping a 6-foot table in each hand, he ground to a halt so quickly that Monroe almost crashed into him. Let's move, brother. Running late, he heard from Monroe behind him, carting chairs for the tables he was carrying. In seconds, he was on the move again, setting up the tables and pushing the chairs underneath. Helen came behind him, floating a mistletoe-patterned cloth over each table. A bright smile lit up her whole face when she stepped back to survey the room and saw Sage in the doorway with a young woman who couldn't possibly be anyone but her daughter. She was a younger version of Sage, to a T. Same almond-shaped eyes, same thick lips, same pointy chin, same brown-skinned complexion. Both were casual in leggings, over-the-knee boots, and long sweaters. Tiny snowmen dangled from Sage's ears, and her daughter wore candy canes. Sage, Helen squealed. And Ray! Good to see y'all again this year! She crossed the room in a few steps and grabbed each of them, pulling them into the hug that seemed inevitable if she was in the room. Helen had even hugged Bennett, even after telling him he was a big glass of chocolate milk. We're still setting up. You're welcome to pitch in. I need napkins and plasticware at each seat. I need beverages set out. Oh, Sage, you can help me get the coffee on. This year I have a crumb cake for dessert, and it goes well with a nice Colombian blend. Helen, Sage, and her daughter disappeared into the kitchen, chatting amongst themselves. Bennett realized he'd been staring at Sage the entire time, and she'd been stealing long glances right back. Monroe was behind him, hauling more chairs into the room. Boy, if you don't close your mouth, a fly gonna get into it. Come on now, I'm ready to eat and we can't sit down till this room is set up. Let's go. Snapping back into action, Bennett and Monroe headed toward the storage shed behind the restaurant to pull out more tables and chairs. Helen's kitchen was packed, wall to wall with people. Every table and chair were occupied, and some stood around the edge of the room, balancing a plate on one hand and a fork in the other. The Temptations' holiday album was on full blast, and the whole place held the scent of roast turkey, prime rib, potatoes, greens, yams, and fresh baked rolls. As promised, Helen's crumb cake and vanilla ice cream topped off the meal perfectly. Sage manned the beverage station, handing out bottles of water, ladling up spiced cider or freshly brewed coffee. Bennett, stuffed to the gills, ambled across the room where he'd been sitting with Monroe and a few of his friends. Sage, he greeted her with an upward head nod. Bennett, she graced him with a smile that warmed his belly. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't know I was coming until last night. My neighbor Monroe invited me. She brightened, almost laughing. He is hilarious. Always coming into Roosters to flirt. Bennett smiled. You mentioned that. So you're saying I have competition? A lot of it if all you're talking about is flirting. The old men in this town love a pretty lady. Bennett laughed. I'm going to tell Monroe you called him an old man. So, he nodded toward the industrial-sized coffee maker. Is this a Rooster's blend? Sage shook her head. Just something Helen orders in bulk. It's good. It's not Rooster's, but it's good. You want a cup? He nodded. Only if you think you can break to join me. I suppose people can press this button and pour a cup of coffee for themselves for a few minutes. Sage poured 2 cups of coffee, then doctored hers with cream and sugar. Bennett did the same, then led the way to the front door of the building. They stepped outside, where it was not quite warm, but not quite cold. Orlando had decorated the facade of the restaurant and the surrounding trees and bushes with Christmas decorations. The bench that sat outside the building was also strung with a few lights. Bennett lowered himself to the bench and scooted over, making room for Sage. She settled in next to him, her hands wrapped around the paper cup for warmth. You suppose this town gets snow ever? Bennett asked. Sage shook her head. Hardly ever, from what I hear. A little too far south. Maybe if a freak storm blows through Alabama. Oh, would be pretty if it did, especially around the lake. Mm-hmm. Sage sipped her coffee, then sighed as she swallowed. So, you want to talk about the weather some more, or did you have a reason for asking me out here? Actually, Bennett chuckled. I didn't have a reason. I saw you come in earlier while we were setting up. I didn't get a chance to say hi, so I'm doing that right now. You look nice. He was sure she was blushing, even if it was on the inside. The edges of her mouth tipped up in a smile, and her lashes fluttered. Thank you, Bennett. Not looking so bad yourself. He'd rolled out of bed after tossing and turning most of the night, around noon, and felt like he'd dressed in a fog. It was still difficult to wake up without Virginia, setting the house up for the day with music and turning the Christmas lights on, the scent of cinnamon rolls and coffee in the air. He had showered, then pulled on a pair of jeans and a sweater the kids had sent him, a navy blue v-neck alpaca wool sweater. He wore a white collared shirt underneath and absent-mindedly splashed on some aftershave before sliding his feet into a pair of loafers and walking out the door. Thanks. A gift from my kids. They know what Dad likes. So, Those earrings, he paused, pointing at them. His lips twitched in an effort not to laugh. Were those a gift? She fingered the dangling snowmen and smirked. Ray knows what Mom likes, but still buys this silly stuff and makes me wear it. We're lucky that it would be inappropriate for me to wear the snowman onesie she made me wear last night. Bennett laughed, then lifted his cup to his lips. Wish I could have seen that, actually, he said, then tipped the brew into his mouth. Yeah, well, if I have my way, it will be buried at the bottom of a drawer. Maybe I can lose it until next year. He laughed again, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. She's beautiful. Looks just like you. She sounds spirited, like her mama. Oh, so much like her mama. But if you would have met Gordon, she looks just as much like him. Acts like him, too. Oh, yeah. He was a pushy man. Opinionated. Sage chuckled softly, then grew quiet. Her eyes dropped to the cup of coffee in her hands. Bennett sat back, then lifted an arm and dropped it to the bench behind her. He gripped her shoulder and gave her a reassuring squeeze. You good? He asked quietly. Sage lifted and lowered a shoulder. Ray and I fought last night. Fought? Well, argued. About my date. About you, about... She sighed deeply, lifting her eyes to the view of an overgrown field marked for sale and, shimmering in the distance, Potter Lake. About me. Sort of about you. We talked it out this morning, but the more I think about it, the more I see her point. She feels like I'm trying to replace Gordon, and maybe she isn't all the way wrong about that. Do you feel like you're trying to replace Gordon? Sage didn't answer for a long, long moment. Then she stood. I don't know. And until I do, maybe it's best to keep to myself for a little while longer. I'd better get back inside. Ray will be looking for me. Bennett didn't even get a chance to argue before she turned on a heel and marched back up the sidewalk toward the restaurant. She flung open the door and stomped inside, the door falling closed behind her with a slam. Well, he said to himself, messed that up without even trying. Join me next time when I will be reading chapters 6, 7, and 8 to close out this sweet holiday short. Thanks for listening.